Story number 1.
The rain had been falling steadily all evening, a soft, rhythmic patter against the windows that filled the house with an eerie sense of isolation. I had always loved the rain, but that night it felt different, heavy, like something was pressing down on the world outside. I was house sitting for a friend, a small place on the outskirts of town, surrounded by thick trees and a long, winding driveway. It was peaceful, at least it should have been. Around midnight, I was curled up on the couch, half watching an old horror movie when the power flickered. The lamps dimmed, the TV screen sputtered, and then everything went out. Just the sound of rain and wind remained. I sighed, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. No big deal. Power outages happened all the time during storms. I figured I'd wait it out. But then I heard it, a knock, soft, just once. I froze, heart hammering. The house was in the middle of nowhere, no neighbors nearby, no reason for anyone to be out here, especially in this weather. I slowly stood up, creeping toward the front door. My phone's weak light barely cut through the darkness. I hesitated, then called out, "Hello?" No answer. Just the rain, heavy against the roof. I held my breath, waiting. Maybe it was a branch or something. Maybe I imagined it. Then, another knock. Louder this time. I took a step back. My fingers hovered over the door handle, but I didn't touch it. Instead, I moved to the window beside the door, trying to peek outside. Nothing. Just darkness and rain. I told myself it had to be the wind. Maybe something loose banging against the house. I grabbed my flashlight and took a deep breath. I had to check, right? The moment I unlocked the door, a chill ran down my spine. The air smelled different. Damp, but off. Like wet earth and something metallic. I pulled the door open just an inch. Empty. No one on the porch, no footprints in the puddles, just the trees shifting in the wind. I shut the door quickly, heart pounding. My mind raced through logical explanations, but none of them made sense. Then my phone vibrated. A text from my friend. "Hey, if the power goes out, don't open the door, no matter what." I felt a sharp jolt of fear. I reread the message, my hands clammy. "Why?" I typed back. No response. I stood there, every instinct screaming at me that something was wrong. That's when I heard it again. Not knocking. Scraping. Something dragging across the outside of the house, slow and deliberate. Moving along the wall just beneath the window. I held my breath. The noise stopped. I turned off my flashlight and stepped back from the door, pressing myself against the wall. Every part of me wanted to run, to hide, but I was frozen. Then the sound shifted. It was at the back of the house now. I swallowed hard. There was a sliding glass door back there. The curtains were closed, but I knew something was standing on the other side of that glass. I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy lamp, and crept toward the back of the house, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The rain pounded harder, drowning out almost everything. I reached the sliding door. I waited. A flash of lightning lit up the yard, and I saw it, a figure, just beyond the glass, not standing, crawling. Its body was low, too low, like its limbs were bent the wrong way. Its fingers, long and thin, were pressed against the glass. No face, just darkness where its eyes should have been. The moment the light faded, I stumbled back, my chest tight with terror. I didn't breathe, didn't move, just waited in the suffocating darkness, and then tap, tap, tap. A single bony finger tapping on the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut. My friend's message echoed in my head. Don't open the door, no matter what. I turned, grabbed my phone, and called them. No answer, another tap, and then a voice. Not from my phone, from outside. Let me in. It was my friend's voice, but it wasn't right. Too flat, too empty. Like a recording, slightly distorted. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Another flash of lightning, and the figure was gone. Just rain. Just empty glass. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the middle of the room, every door locked, every curtain shut. The power came back hours later, and my phone finally buzzed. A message from my friend. "Are you okay?" I didn't know what to say. The next morning I left. When my friend got back, I asked about the message they sent me. They frowned, confused. "I never sent that." I showed them my phone. Their face went pale. "I had a cousin who used to stay here," they said slowly. "He swore something followed him when it rained, said it would knock, scratch, ask to be let in. My family thought he was crazy." I stared at them, my skin cold. "What happened to him?" I asked. They hesitated. "He opened the door." I don't go back there anymore, and I never, ever open the door when it rains. Story the end.
Story number 2.
The rain had been falling steadily for hours, a constant sheet of water that obscured the view from the small cabin in the woods. Sam sat by the window, watching the storm rage outside. The trees were barely visible through the sheets of rain, and the wind howled as it pushed against the walls of the cabin, making the wooden structure creak and groan. It was the kind of storm that felt like it could go on forever. Sam liked it, though. It gave him a sense of isolation, of peace, even though he knew that most people would have found it unsettling. He was alone tonight. Sarah, his wife, had gone to visit her sister for a few days, leaving him to enjoy some solitude. The small cabin was their retreat, a place they came to get away from the noise of everyday life. But tonight, something felt off. It wasn't the storm or the fact that he was alone. It was a strange unease, a feeling that he couldn't shake. The sound of a knock on the door shattered the stillness of the night. Sam jumped, his heart racing. Who could be out there in this weather? He glanced at the clock, 10:42 p.m. No one had come by in hours. He had been expecting a quiet night. No one else lived within miles of the cabin, and the storm was too severe for anyone to be out on the road. But the knock had been insistent, deliberate. He stood up slowly, his feet dragging across the wooden floor. The knocking came again, this time more urgent. Sam approached the door cautiously, his heart hammering in his chest. He peeked through the small window beside the door, trying to see who was out there, but the rain had made everything outside a blur of gray. There was no way to make out anything. "Hello?" Sam called through the door. His voice felt small, fragile against the wind and rain. There was no answer, just the sound of the wind howling outside. Sam's hand hovered over the doorknob. He wanted to open it, but something was telling him not to. He had been living in this cabin for years, and nothing like this had ever happened. It was always quiet here, just the wind and the rain and the rustling of the trees. But tonight, everything felt different. The knocking came again, louder this time, more frantic. Sam flinched, taking a step back from the door. Whoever was on the other side wasn't going away. He thought about calling Sarah, but he quickly discarded the idea. She was hours away, and the signal here was spotty at best. Besides, there was no way she'd believe him if he said someone was knocking at his door in the middle of a storm. The rational part of his mind told him it was probably just some lost traveler, someone who had gotten stuck in the weather and was looking for shelter. But something in the pit of his stomach told him otherwise. He slowly unlatched the deadbolt and pulled the door open, just a crack, enough to peek outside. The wind whipped the rain sideways, but there was no one standing on the porch, only the dark, empty yard stretching out in front of him, drenched and covered in sheets of rain. Sam blinked, confused. The knocking had come from right here, just on the other side of the door, but now there was nothing. He stood frozen for a moment, scanning the yard. His breath came in short, starry, shallow gasps. The night was impossibly quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. It didn't make sense. The knocking had been so real, so close, and now there was nothing. He stepped outside, the rain immediately soaking him through. He looked around, but there was no sign of anyone. The yard stretched out in every direction, the edges blurred by the storm. There were no footprints, no sign of anyone who had been there. It was as if the knocking had come from nowhere. Sam's mind raced. He couldn't explain it. He stepped back inside and shut the door behind him, his hands trembling. He double-checked the locks and then moved back to the window. His pulse was still racing, his breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had lived in this cabin for years, and he knew it like the back of his hand. Nothing ever happened here, and yet tonight everything felt wrong. The wind howled outside and the rain continued to pour, but there was a new sound now, a soft scratching noise like something dragging along the walls of the cabin. Sam froze again, listening intently. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the rain. It was coming from inside the cabin, from somewhere nearby. The scratching noise grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like claws against wood, slow and deliberate. Sam's heart pounded in his chest. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the room, looking for the source of the noise. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. There was no one here, no one who could be making that sound. The scratching continued, now coming from the hallway. Sam's legs felt like they were made of lead, but he forced himself to move toward it. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to find, but every fiber of his being screamed at him to check, to see what was making the noise. The hallway was dark, only lit by the faint glow of a lamp from the living room. Sam crept down the narrow corridor, his footsteps soft against the floor. The scratching grew louder as he approached the bedroom door. His breath caught in his throat as he reached for the doorknob. And then the door creaked open, slowly, as if something or someone was on the other side, waiting. Sam stepped into the room, his heart in his throat. The scratching had stopped, but now there was something else, a low, guttural sound, like breathing. Heavy breathing coming from the corner of the room. Sam's eyes darted around the dimly lit space. There in the far corner, something moved. It was a figure, hunched over, crouching down low. The sound of breathing filled the air, deep and ragged. Sam's stomach twisted into knots. He couldn't see its face, only the silhouette of its body. Its hands were curled into claws, heart scraping against the floor. Sam's breath caught in his throat as he backed away slowly, every muscle in his body screaming for him to run. But his legs wouldn't move. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure in the corner. It shifted, a low growl escaping its throat. And then, without warning, it stood up and began to approach him. Sam turned and bolted out of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. He ran down the hallway, out of the cabin, into the rain-soaked yard. He didn't care that he was drenched. He didn't care about anything except getting as far away from that cabin as possible. The figure was behind him, following him, its growls echoing in the storm. Sam ran through the darkness, the rain stinging his face, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just ran, hoping to escape whatever it was that had been waiting for him in the cabin. But the growls grew louder, closer, and Sam knew, deep down, that there was no escaping it. Story the end.
Story number 3.
The first time I saw the man in the rain, I thought he was a trick of the storm. Just another dark figure blending into the downpour. It was the kind of night where the sky split open with light, only to slam shut in thunder so loud it rattled the bones. I was driving home from my night shift, hands gripping the wheel, the wipers struggling against sheets of water. At first, he was just a silhouette on the side of the road, standing at the edge of the forest. His head was tilted slightly, as if he were watching the road, watching me. I didn't stop. Who would? It wasn't a night to be outside, and something about him, the way he didn't move at all, sent a cold thread of fear winding through me. I told myself he was just a lost traveler, maybe someone whose car had broken down. But my gut told me something different. The next time I saw him was a week later. Same time, same road, same storm. He was standing a little closer to the shoulder now, but still unmoving, still watching. This time, I was sure of what I saw. He was tall, too tall. His shoulders were broad, and he had no umbrella, no jacket, just dark clothes soaked to the bone. I pressed down on the gas pedal and didn't look back. When I got home, I locked the door, bolted it, and even pulled the curtains shut. But the feeling that I had brought something home with me was impossible to shake. I told my girlfriend about it the next morning. "It's probably some guy who lives around there," she said, sipping her coffee. "Maybe he's just waiting for a ride." I didn't believe that. Not really. But I nodded and forced a laugh. Yeah, maybe. The third time, I almost crashed my car. The rain was heavier than ever, turning the world into a blur of black and gray. As I rounded the bend, my headlights caught movement, something in the middle of the road. It was him. This time, he wasn't standing at the edge of the trees. He was in the center of the road, facing me, arms at his sides. I slammed the brakes, tires skidding on the slick pavement. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. But when I blinked, he was gone. Just gone. No sign of him anywhere. No footprints in the puddles, no retreating shadow into the woods, just the rain and my own shaking hands on the wheel. I got home and sat in my driveway for a long time, rain drumming against the roof. I didn't tell my girlfriend this time. She wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed myself. But the fear had settled deep in my chest. That night, I woke up to the sound of rain against the window. But something was off. There was another sound, one that didn't belong, the faint, rhythmic tapping on the glass. I turned my head slowly, my breath caught in my throat. He was outside, standing just beyond the window, rain pouring over him, face obscured by darkness. His hands hung at his sides, but I swear I could feel his gaze, feel it pressing into me. I wanted to scream, to wake up my girlfriend, but my voice was stuck in my throat. The tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. When I found the courage to move, I flicked on the bedside lamp and looked out the window. Nothing, just the rain, washing everything away. The next morning, I called in sick. I wasn't going back down that road. Not now. Not ever. For a while, things were quiet. No strange figures in the rain, no tapping at the window. I almost convinced myself that I had imagined it all, until the final time. It wasn't raining that night. The sky was clear, the air crisp. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. Tap, 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 tap. Not on the window this time, on the front door. I froze. My girlfriend was asleep in the bedroom. No one else was supposed to be here. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate. I stood, every muscle in my body screaming at me not to open the door. But something pulled me forward, some horrible curiosity that I couldn't shake. I reached out, hesitated, then yanked the door open. Nothing. Just the night. Just silence. But then, I looked down. Wet footprints on the porch, leading up to the door, and nowhere else. No sign of someone walking away, no fading trail, just those prints, stopping at my doorstep in the faint, lingering smell of rain. I haven't seen him since. But every time there's a storm, I swear, I feel him, watching, waiting, somewhere in the rain. Story the end.
Story number 4.
The rain was relentless that night, hammering against the windshield as I drove down the empty stretch of highway. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, the wipers working furiously to keep up with the downpour. I had made this drive countless times before, heading home from my late shift at the diner, but something about this night felt wrong. It was just past 2 a.m., the kind of hour when the world feels abandoned. No cars, no distant headlights. Just me, the rain, and the road stretching ahead, disappearing into the storm. Then I saw her, a figure on the side of the road, barely visible in the rain. A woman standing alone, drenched, her long dark hair hanging in thick, wet strands. Her dress, if you could call it that, was torn, clinging to her like it had been soaked for hours. I slowed down, not because I wanted to, because I had to. Something deep inside me, some primal instinct, whispered that I should keep driving. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left her there, something terrible would happen. I pulled over, rolled down the window just enough to call out, "Hey, are you okay?" No answer. She stood there unmoving, her head tilted slightly downward. The hair on my arms stood up. I swallowed hard. "Do you need a ride?" Slowly, she lifted her head and smiled. Not the kind of smile you'd expect from someone in distress. Not relieved, not grateful. It was knowing. Almost like she'd been waiting for me. I didn't want to open the door, but my fingers moved before my brain could stop them. She slid into the passenger seat without a word. The smell of rain, earth, and something faintly metallic filled the car. I forced a nervous chuckle. "Rough night?" She turned her head toward me. Up close, her face was pale, too pale, like she hadn't seen the sun in years. "Thank you for stopping," she said finally. Her voice was soft, barely above the sound of the rain. Most people don't. I forced a smile, trying to ignore the way my stomach clenched at her words. "Where are you headed?" She hesitated. Then, quietly, she said, "Home." I nodded, trying to keep my hands steady on the wheel. "All right, just tell me where." She didn't. She just stared ahead, watching the road. I drove in silence for a while. The rain made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The highway stretched on, endless and empty. My pulse thudded in my ears. Every few moments, I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. Her clothes hadn't dried at all, despite the heat running in the car. Water pooled beneath her seat. My fingers tightened around the wheel. Then she spoke. "You shouldn't have stopped." My throat went dry. "What?" She turned to face me fully now, that eerie smile still on her lips. Her eyes were dark, bottomless. "You should have kept driving," she whispered. I didn't realize I had slowed the car until a deafening honk split the night. Headlights flared in my vision, too close, too fast. I jerked the wheel. The car swerved violently as tires screamed against the wet pavement. And then, nothing. Silence. When I opened my eyes, the rain had stopped. I was sitting in my car, parked neatly on the side of the road. The engine was off. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. She was gone. The seat was dry. No sign of water. No footprints, like she had never been there at all. Shaking, I reached for my phone. It was 4 a.m. I had lost nearly 2 hours. I drove home in a daze, my body on autopilot. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself it had been a dream. But then I saw it. A single, wet handprint on the inside of the passenger door. Story the end.
Story number 5.
The rain had been falling in sheets all evening, heavy and unrelenting, the kind of rain that turned roads into rivers and made headlights almost useless. I hated driving at night in storms like this, but I had no choice. I was heading back from my brother's house, a 2-hour drive through winding back roads with barely any streetlights. It was past midnight when I saw the first set of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I was relieved. I hadn't seen another car for miles, and there was something unsettling about being the only one out on the road. But the feeling quickly changed when I realized the car wasn't passing me. It was following. Too close. I squinted against the rain-blurred mirror. The headlights were bright, almost blinding. Whoever was behind me wasn't using their low beams, which was annoying but not unusual. I figured they just wanted me to speed up. I didn't. These roads were slick, full of sharp turns. If I lost control, I'd end up in a ditch, or worse. The car stayed right behind me. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Every turn I made, it followed. A cold dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't normal. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just going the same way. Maybe they were nervous about the storm too and wanted to follow my taillights. Then they flashed their high beams, once, twice. A signal, or a warning. I swallowed hard. My hands were slick with sweat against the wheel. I turned onto a smaller road, one that led through a dense stretch of forest. It was a risk. If something happened, I'd be completely alone. But I needed to see if they were actually following me. They turned too fast. Their tires skidded slightly before regaining control. My pulse hammered. This wasn't a coincidence. I pressed harder on the gas, my heart racing. The rain pounded the windshield, making it harder to see. The road curved sharply ahead. I took the turn faster than I should have, my tires struggling for grip. The car behind me did the same. They were keeping up. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Then, another set of headlights appeared ahead. A truck. My headlights flashed over its wet metal frame as it passed, and for the briefest moment, I caught my own reflection in the mirror. But something else, too. Something in my back seat. A shape. A figure. I gasped and nearly lost control of the car. My hands clenched the wheel, and my breath came in ragged gasps. The car behind me suddenly slowed down. I barely noticed. My mind was still in free fall, trying to process what I had just seen, or thought I had seen. I flicked my eyes to the rearview mirror, my stomach twisting. Nothing. Just the empty back seat. The car behind me was gone too. One moment it was there, the next, vanished. No headlights, no taillights. Just the rain and the dark road stretching behind me. I didn't stop driving, didn't check my phone, didn't even blink until I pulled into my driveway. When I finally stumbled out of the car, I felt like I had been holding my breath for an hour. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my house keys. The rain had slowed to a drizzle now, quiet against the roof. I reached for the door handle and stopped. There, on the outside of my driver's side window, was a single...
Story number 6.
The rain had started in the late afternoon, a light drizzle that gradually turned into a heavy downpour by nightfall. I was driving home from a weekend at my parents' house, a 3-hour journey through long stretches of countryside and barely populated towns. Normally, I didn't mind the drive. It was peaceful. But that night, something felt off. The storm had knocked out most of the streetlights, leaving the road ahead shrouded in darkness. My headlights barely cut through the sheets of rain, and every so often, a flash of lightning illuminated the surrounding fields. Empty. Endless. An hour into my drive, I noticed something strange. A figure on the side of the road. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The rain distorted everything, making shapes shift and disappear. But as I got closer, I saw it clearly. Someone standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. They didn't move. Didn't wave for help, just stood there completely still. My gut told me not to stop. But as I passed, my headlights briefly illuminated their face. A woman. Her skin was pale, her eyes too wide, too dark. Her dress clung to her, soaked through, and her hair hung in wet strands. Then she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was something else. Something wrong. I sped up. The rain slammed against my windshield, my wipers working overtime. My heart pounded, my grip tightening on the wheel. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to check my mirrors. Then my radio crackled. It'd been silent the whole drive. No music, no static, nothing. But now, through the sound of the rain, I heard something. A whisper. At first, I thought it was interference from the storm. Then I heard my name. It was faint, barely audible, but I knew what I had heard, and it was coming from the back seat. I didn't dare look. My breath came in short gasps. My hands felt ice cold. Another whisper. Closer this time. Then, laughter, soft, just behind me. A sob built in my throat. My foot pressed down on the gas pedal. I needed to get home. I needed to get out of this car. Lightning flashed again. For a split second, the inside of my car was fully illuminated. And I saw her, in the rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat. Her hair dripped onto the leather. Her dress, still soaked, clung to her thin frame. Her head was tilted slightly, her dark eyes locked onto mine. I screamed. The car swerved violently as I lost control. My tires skidded against the slick pavement, and I felt the sickening pull of gravity as I veered toward the ditch. And then, nothing. When I opened my eyes, my car was parked neatly on the side of the road. Engine off, wipers still, rain falling gently now. I was gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My entire body trembled. I turned. The back seat was empty, but the seat was wet. I didn't stay to question it. I started the car and drove faster than I ever had in my life. When I finally reached home, I stumbled out, drenched in sweat and shaking. I slammed the car door and ran inside, locking every bolt behind me. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, when I finally worked up the courage to check my car, I found something on the back seat. A single wet footprint. Story, the end.
Story number 7.
The rain had started in the early evening, a slow drizzle that turned into a torrential downpour by nightfall. I had always loved the sound of rain, until that night. I was driving back from my cousin's house, a good 40-minute drive through back roads and empty fields. It wasn't my usual route home, but a detour due to flooding had forced me onto an unfamiliar road. No streetlights, barely any houses, just endless trees lining both sides of the slick pavement. The storm made it nearly impossible to see. My wipers struggled against the rain, and every few seconds a flash of lightning would illuminate the road ahead. That's when I saw it. A car, parked on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking weakly. It was an old sedan, dark-colored, barely visible in the storm. As I got closer, I noticed the driver's side door was open. No one was inside. I slowed down instinctively, scanning the area through my fogged-up windows. Someone had to be nearby. Maybe they had broken down and gone to find help. But in this weather, it didn't make sense. Then I saw the footprints. Bare, wet footprints leading from the open car door to the middle of the road. They stopped abruptly. No return prints. No sign of where the person had gone. A chill ran down my spine. I told myself to keep driving, but my hands hesitated on the wheel. What if someone was hurt? What if they needed help? I rolled down my window just an inch, rain immediately blowing inside. "Hello?" I called out. My voice was swallowed by the storm. Silence. Just as I was about to roll the window back up, lightning flashed again, and I saw a figure standing in the trees. Not close, but not far enough for comfort. Just beyond the first row of trees, barely visible in the darkness. They were facing me, not moving, just watching. A rush of fear tightened my chest. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped off, my tires skidding slightly against the wet road. My heart pounded as I checked my mirrors, expecting to see the figure stepping out onto the road. But there was nothing, just the rain and the dark, empty highway behind me. I drove faster than I should have, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. The road twisted and turned, the rain making visibility worse by the second. But I didn't dare stop. After what felt like forever, I saw the glow of a gas station up ahead. Relief flooded through me. I pulled in quickly, parking under the bright fluorescent lights. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the feeling that something was still watching me. The gas station was mostly empty, just the attendant behind the counter and a single other car parked near the entrance. I stepped inside, shivering from more than just the cold. The attendant looked up as I walked in. "Hell of a night to be out," he said. I nodded, still trying to steady my breathing. "Yeah, crazy storm." He gestured toward the coffee machine. Help yourself. Looks like you've seen a ghost. I gave a weak chuckle but didn't respond. Instead, I wandered toward the back of the store, grabbing a bottle of water just to keep my hands busy. That's when I noticed something. The other car in the lot, the dark sedan. The same one from the road. My stomach dropped. The hazard lights were off now. The door was shut. Someone had driven it here. I turned slowly, scanning the small store. Just the attendant, no other customers. A slow, sinking feeling crept over me. I set the water bottle down and walked quickly to the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. Rain pounded against the pavement outside. I reached my car, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking. Then, just as I yanked the door open, I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. The back seat. A shape, a figure, hunched and unmoving. Waiting. I didn't scream. I didn't turn around. I just ran. Story the end.
Story number 8.
The rain had been falling steadily all evening, coating the roads in a slick, reflective sheen. I had been driving for over an hour, trying to make it home after a long shift at the bar where I worked. It was late, just past 2 a.m., and the roads were eerily empty. No headlights in the distance, no taillights ahead, just me, the rain, and the dark stretch of highway. I was exhausted, my eyelids heavy, but I kept my focus on the road. The storm made everything look distorted. Trees swayed like shadowy figures, rain splashed across my windshield like hands pressing against the glass. I turned up the radio, hoping it would keep me awake, but the static swallowed the station, leaving only a faint, garbled, whispering sound. I tried not to let it bother me. Then I saw something ahead. At first, it was just a vague shape in the distance. My headlights cut through the darkness, revealing a person standing on the side of the road. A man. He was dressed in dark clothes, his head tilted downward, his arms hanging limply at his sides. The rain poured over him, but he didn't move, didn't wave for help, just stood there, completely still. I slowed the car slightly, my pulse quickening. Something about him felt wrong. I wasn't sure why, but an overwhelming sense of dread settled in my stomach. Then he lifted his head. His face was pale, almost sickly white, and his eyes were hollow, dark, like two empty sockets. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my foot down on the gas, my heart slamming against my ribs. I wasn't stopping. No way. As I sped past, I made the mistake of looking in my rearview mirror. He was still there, but he wasn't standing anymore. He was running. His body moved unnaturally fast, his limbs jerking as he sprinted toward my car. His face, his horrible, empty face, never changed. His eyes locked onto mine through the mirror. I panicked. I floored the gas, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. My car skidded slightly before catching grip, rocketing down the road. I didn't dare look back again. I kept driving, heart hammering, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. After several miles, I finally dared to glance in the mirror. Nothing. The road behind me was empty, no sign of him. I exhaled shakily, trying to convince myself that maybe my exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Maybe the storm and lack of sleep had made me imagine it. I wanted to believe that. Then I heard it. A soft, wet sound. From the back seat. It was faint, just barely audible over the rain, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. I could hear breathing. Shallow, ragged. Right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to keep my eyes on the road, to pretend I didn't hear it. But the breathing grew louder. And then a whisper. Not words. Just a low, rasping sound, so close it felt like whoever or whatever was behind me was leaning in. I pressed harder on the gas, my vision blurring with panic. The road twisted ahead, the rain making it impossible to see, but I didn't care. I needed to get home. My house was only a few miles away now. If I could just make it, a wet hand slid onto my shoulder. I screamed. The car swerved violently. My tires skidded, the back end fishtailing. I barely managed to regain control, my breath coming in panicked gasps. And then the pressure was gone. The car was silent again. I didn't stop driving. I didn't look back. I didn't breathe properly until I reached my driveway. I scrambled out of the car, slammed the door, and ran inside, locking every bolt behind me. My entire body trembled as I pressed my back against the door, my pulse thudding in my ears. I forced myself to turn and look through the window. The driveway was empty. My car sat there, covered in rain. But as lightning flashed across the sky, I saw it. A single wet handprint on the back window. Story the end.